An important part of a house that not everyone pays attention to is the base of the house. Today I'll tell you how I insulated it, how I dealt with ants, and how I finished the base so the house was one step closer to being done. Work on insulating the base started even before I poured the foundation, since I was basically making permanent forms out of XPS foam board. This way it's very convenient to do the work and we immediately get an insulated base. It will protect our foundation from freezing, make the house more comfortable, and reduce heating bills. Because I didn't extend the aerated concrete block past the foundation edges, a thermal bridge formed here, so I had to extend the insulation 10 centimeters higher. I cut 10 by 10 centimeter polystyrene foam strips and glued them onto the insulation with adhesive foam. XPS is ideal for insulating the base because it barely absorbs moisture, maintains its properties over time, and can be buried or covered with concrete without issue. If I didn't already have foundation insulation, I'd do it about the same way. I'd just glue on full-size pieces for the whole base. Similarly, I would use adhesive foam, first scratching the sheets with a wire brush to improve adhesion. And by standard practice, this also calls for additional mechanical fastening with disc dowels. I didn't use them because I made large grooves inside before pouring the concrete. When poured, the concrete filled the grooves, permanently bonding the materials. When insulating an already concreted structure, you shouldn't forget the dowel. After insulating the base, the next step was plastering, and before moving into the house, I made a temporary drip edge. This was necessary to prevent water or snow from accumulating on the horizontal surface, so they wouldn't soak the aerated concrete block, which loses a lot of its thermal resistance when it gets wet. And over the years, it can even start to deteriorate in that spot. Building isn't cheap, so all the work on the house dragged on for about 2.5 years. And all this time, the extruded polystyrene was left exposed to the sun. As you know, ultraviolet light is quite destructive, so it's not recommended to leave uncovered foam board in the sun for a long time. But there's no need to panic either. During all this time, maybe only about 2 millimeters of the surface got damaged, and the material hasn't lost its properties. I removed the damaged part and at the same time thoroughly scored the boards with a handsaw. It was pretty easy and quick. When I was building, those didn't exist, but now boards with a rough surface come straight from the factory, which is especially useful for insulating facades. So I was scraping the foam board with a saw and discovered a very unpleasant surprise in the form of ants. At first I thought they were running back to their nest near the concrete apron, but after watching, I saw they were actually running inside the insulation between the boards. This kind of neighborhood is extremely unpleasant, and despite what seemed to be fairly well done work on the house shell, the ants quickly made their way inside the house. I had to urgently do something about it. I couldn't pick it all out with my finger, so I decided to tear off a piece of the insulation. And the good news was that, as I mentioned at the beginning, the insulation stuck to the concrete so well that you can hardly tear it off even if you try. The bad news is that the ants actually started making a nest in the insulation. To be fair, I should note that the ants hardly chewed on the boards themselves, but mostly settled in the foam joints between the boards. I dug everything out enough to drive out everyone who had already managed to settle there. Ants are real pests and can basically show up anywhere, regardless of the material. For example, I found their nest in my gutter. What are you even doing on the roof, huh? Dude, you're lost. Go home. In one of my previous videos on the channel, I talked about how I treated my yard for mosquitoes, and it turned out that with the same product containing cypermethrin, you can also get rid of ants. I diluted the product to twice the concentration indicated on the package, sprayed everything around the foundation, and the next day the ants were gone. I have a theory that in this spot I have an apple tree, apples fall from it, and sometimes I don't have time to pick them up. Apparently the apples are what attract the local wildlife. Overall, this isn't my first experience with ants, and I've learned before that you need to keep food away from them and then everything will be fine. And before the ants come back with reinforcements, my task is to cover the foundation insulation with plaster. I didn't buy any extra plaster, but decided to use the same one I used for plastering the aerated concrete blocks. It's a warm decorative pebble plaster called Spadar. It's nearly perfect for plastering aerated concrete blocks, so I wanted to see how it works on the foundation insulation. I mixed one bag with 7 liters of water, and using spatulas of different sizes, I started applying it to the foundation without any primers, mesh, or any additional steps. I let the first layer sit for a few days, then applied the second. The first layer covered all joints and foam seams to create a smooth surface for the finish. For this layer, I mixed the plaster thinner, 8 liters of water per bag, and after applying it to a few meters of the surface, I took a plastic float and smoothed it out with circular motions. This way, you get a more pronounced texture, and most importantly, all the spatula marks are hidden, resulting in a beautiful, even surface. You need to do one side in a single go without breaks, so the plaster doesn't have time to set. Otherwise, the joint between sections will be visible, and it won't look good. On a small area like the house foundation, it's easy to do, even alone. If necessary, you can make a joint at the corners. I'm not saying to use Spadar specifically on the foundation insulation. It's primarily a plaster for aerated concrete blocks. And as in my case, when the whole house was plastered with the same plaster, it's convenient, for example, to use the leftovers from the mixes on the foundation. This way, you can even claim some savings. The finishing layer on the foundation turned out almost perfect. I'll tell you a bit later how the plaster held up through the winter, but for now, it was time to move on to the terrace construction. For this, I started painting the foundation. Like a true DIY builder, I once again used materials not for their intended purpose, and I painted not with special paint, but with the one left over from painting the wooden trim on the exterior. I wanted to buy Tikkurila, but I went to one store and they didn't have it, went to another store and they didn't have it either, so I bought Tex Biotex. I don't know if it's good or not, I just saw that its manufacturer is Tikkurila. I bought a white base and they tinted it for me right there in the store. They tinted it to the color I needed, specifically RAL 7024. I applied it with a brush, since a roller wouldn't cover the stone texture because it's pretty deep and I don't have a paint sprayer. But I do have childhood trauma from working as a plaster painter, after which I never want to pick up a paint sprayer again in my life, but that's a whole different story. Maybe I'll tell that story in a future video, but for now, I had to finish the terrace. Something always comes up. I didn't manage to finish the plinth that season and the house went into winter like that, but before it got too late, I had to at least finish the step for getting out onto the terrace. The detail at the bottom of the panoramic window was done incorrectly from the start and had to improvise. I decided to fill the step itself, made of MPC with foam inside, hoping to give it more resistance to heat transfer. I cut a wedge out of the same foam board, applied foam to the surface, and glued the step in place. Thanks to the wedges, it ended up at an angle, and in terms of height, the step fit neatly under the window profile. This way, water can flow down the window, onto the step, and along the step itself as well. Overall, it was acceptable throughout, but the corners, as shown by the thermal imager, were far from ideal. I hope to fix them by adding insulated exterior reveals. But overall, it's better to initially install a panoramic window on a special insulated triatherm profile, or at least on an aerated concrete block. I keep a detailed chronology on the channel about how another winter went for the house. A new construction season has started, and surprisingly, the paint didn't even get completely ruined over the winter. Some mineral spirits, a lot of stirring with a stick, and the paint is ready to use again. Funny, I was short by just 100 grams of paint. Now I'll have to buy another liter for 1,000 just to finish painting. I didn't think to buy mineral spirits, I ran out. I would have diluted it by 10% to make it thinner and the paint would have been enough. I'll remember this and try not to get into such situations again. I bought extra VGT exterior paint for wooden facades, only because it was the only option to buy exactly a liter and not a huge bucket. Before painting, a metal drip edge had to be installed. I started at the corner near the panoramic window, and to make a clean corner, it needs to be cut correctly. The process is simple. We hold the drip edge strip to the wall and mark the wall's corner on it. From there, I measure a distance to the side that's 10% less than the drip edge's width. Since my drip edge is 100 millimeters in my case, I measured out 9 centimeters, draw a vertical line, and then once again measure 9 centimeters to the side. I drew diagonal lines down to the center line, and on one of the slanted lines, you need to draw a parallel line 1.5 centimeters inward. Then I cut off all the excess with metal shears. The first corner, as they say, turned out badly. I took it all off, damn it. I had to redo it. I don't like the result. I actually forgot to cut this little part here. Because of that, it didn't bend well. Plus, overall, it all crumples up a lot, so I should have done it more carefully. And damn, I really need a second person at the corner to hold it. Because I screwed it in crooked, it all bent over there, so now I'll probably move it somewhere farther. I leaned the bent corner against the wall with the laser level turned on, so it could be seen from outside. I specifically went to work in the evening. I drilled several holes with a 5mm drill bit. I hammered a regular 6mm nylon anchor into the hole. I did this intentionally because D300 aerated concrete block is very soft. I used silicone adhesive sealant on the drip edge side pressed against the wall. And here I missed one very important step, which I will demonstrate clearly later. I attached the silicone sealed drip edge to the wall with color-matched roofing screws, RAL 7024, securing it through the holes. To attach the next strip, I bent back the edge on one and cut off about 1.5 to 2 centimeters from the other so they would fit together well. Which to bend or cut depends on your viewing angle. Arrange it so the joints between strips are less noticeable. To attach the strip, I drilled 2 holes together with the previous one and made another hole in the middle. Then I hammered in the dowels. I just slightly lifted the installed strip by the edge, and it was quite easy to hammer in the dowel. I applied silicone and attached all the strips one after another this way. Subtitles by Dima Korsov. There are tons of videos online about how to do corners properly and how to do these things the right way, but I couldn't really find anything. And yeah, you can make an envelope fold there. They even sell pieces for that. Subtitles Demeter Zoc, but my door will end up opening like this, and for sure I specifically cut the insulation here because I want my door to open like this. I need to figure something out here, damn. On the side facing the terrace, I decided to buy some end caps, cut them to the size I needed, and attach them to the end of the flashing. It looks fine on camera, but in real life, I'll say it's not the best solution. On the side of the entrance door, I had to improvise, and I bent the resulting triangle around the cut strip. Overall, it actually turned out pretty decent. It's definitely safe, and from an aesthetic point of view, it would only look better if you had a tool specifically designed for bending. It's not possible to make a straight bend with pliers. The strips get crumpled and the aesthetics are lost, but the solution works. I still need to finish this joint. Here, it should look better. Of course, I don't really like these end caps here. On windowsill flashings, they'll probably be fine because they'll be wedged in place. Here though, it's definitely better to bend it with metal. The front door looks more reliable in this regard. When you open the door, nothing gets in the way, everything is fine. Here too, you won't tear your clothes with your foot, you won't catch on anything, you won't cut yourself. It just needs a little touch-up paint to make it more even. But then I thought I'd probably keep tripping over it all the time. And I didn't plaster it. I should have made it look nicer here, plastered it, but for now I decided to leave it like this. Maybe later I'll cover it with some decorative trim, but for now I just painted it over. There are still some spots to touch up to make it look even better. And even this kind of bend is quite safe, and it actually looks fine like this. The door can leave a bump. It's not very sharp, but it can still leave a mark. Maybe I should glue some little silicone piece there. The line isn't completely straight and I could have done it better. The problem is that the foam pushed it out. In some places the foam expanded by 2 mm and in others by 2 cm. Plus, when I was plastering, some plaster fell off and I spread it unevenly. All of this made installing the strips a bit more difficult. And it was necessary from the start, after gluing the insulation, to cut it evenly along the laser line and finish plastering. This must be done for fire safety reasons. And then, most likely, the strips could have been installed even without a laser level, just by eye. But overall, I think for a job that was done for the first time in my life, it's quite acceptable. There's a flaw that became apparent when it started raining and we went to sleep, because I know that rain drums loudly on the window flashing and it needs to be soundproofed. You can use automotive vibration insulation, like what I used to soundproof my bathtub. Alternatively, techno-nickel bitumen tapes are convenient for sticking along the drip edge. And there won't be that ringing noise when the rain hits. I didn't think everything would be so audible through the wall under the plinth, but it turns out, damn it, it rattles under the plinth too. At least these 2 planks under the window should have been soundproofed. Someone there is trying to shove a foam gun in and fill it with foam. I didn't do it because with my golden hands I'm afraid I'll just mess everything up. Well, maybe I'll live with it for now, and if it really starts to bother me, then maybe I'll do something about it. Maybe I'll take apart the 2 planks and finish the job. For now, I'll just keep watching. That's the story. It doesn't happen often because I have big overhangs, and the way the house is positioned on the lot, rain almost never gets here. Only when there's a downpour with wind. Here in St. Petersburg, we get light drizzle for days at a time. We only get a few heavy downpours in the summer, and that's it. So I'll live with it for now, and if it starts to bother me, I'll redo it. For now, everything is fine. Looking ahead, I'll say that I experimented with gluing a bitumen tape to the new drip edge. Plus, we had a couple more rains here, and I came to the conclusion that all the window drip edges on the plinth really need to be soundproofed. Here's how a regular drip edge sounds versus a soundproofed one. The difference is just incredible. The drip edge holds perfectly on the plinth. I experimented with fasteners on the D300 aerated concrete block in advance. This is how much money I spent on everything. If I bought bitumen tape, it would have cost another 5,000 more, but maybe you can find cheaper tape. I think I figured out where it came from. An incredible number of comments about whether metal roofing makes noise. Because apparently if a person has never lived in a private house and has always lived in an apartment, even in apartments I've come across situations where rain drums on the metal windowsill and it's incredibly annoying, it really gets on your nerves. And apparently people think that a metal roof will be exactly the same, plus with an even larger area, and that it must cause some terrible inconvenience. But in reality, that's not the case at all. At least for me, it's just the normal sound of rain. There isn't that annoying sound like when it bangs on hollow metal flashing. So, in this regard, there's really no need to be afraid of metal roofing. At least in a house design like mine. The plaster, partially painted, has lasted on the plinth for a year. And only at the joints of the insulation boards did a few small cracks appear in a couple of places, which are only visible in close-up. Even at arm's length, I can't see them. If you don't know their location, you'll never find them. home. I visited a house built with 400mm thick D400 aerated concrete blocks, which extended 10 centimeters beyond the slab. And there wasn't any of that stuff. You don't need to build anything extra in that case. You end up with one flat surface. A base coat was also applied to the house. And at the joint of different materials, we have extruded polystyrene and aerated concrete. After a year, a crack appeared there and everything started to fall off. And it looked ugly. In such cases, you either try to fix it with mesh, but according to the proper method, you're supposed to make a damping insert to separate the two layers from each other, the different materials. And in this case, we end up with a deformation joint that looks aesthetically pleasing, and over the years, nothing will crack anywhere. Overall, I liked how the plaster behaves on extruded polystyrene. And there are cases like this, for example. I initially knew that it's preferable to make the facade from a homogeneous material. I poured reinforced concrete lintels inside the blocks so the house would have aerated concrete outside instead of extruded foam insulation. The ring beam also has aerated concrete on the outside. It often happens that people end up with aerated concrete, extruded foam, aerated concrete, extruded foam, and when finishing the facade with plaster, you have to deal with these different materials, sometimes even using mesh to solve the problem. But ideally, of course, you should plan for this from the start and try to make the facade out of a uniform material. There were also no more ants noticed near the plinth over the year. They don't want to gnaw on the plaster anymore. This piece of wood gave me a hard time while I was pouring. For later pours, I used two plaster corners joined together, which I screwed in as guides. They're convenient to pour with, and you don't get any gaps because there are spaces here and those damn ants can get in there and do their stuff. Next, I still need to finish plastering the facade of my house with a final layer, add a bit more wood cladding, and the house will look really beautiful. But more on that next time, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it, and see you in the next video.